And now we're very honored, and let me present to you David Hanckock. He's a director of film and cinema at IHS Screen Digest, where he has worked for the past 17 years. He's an expert in global and cinema markets and has researched digital cinema markets and business models for the past 8 years. He has advised a number of companies, banks, government on the digital transition, and has been a member of several expert working groups on the subject, including for the European Commission. Warmly welcome.
Thank you, Tova. Thank you. I should be honoured. Thank you very much for inviting me. I thank Anna and Ramon for inviting me here today. I've been asked to speak slowly, which is not in my nature. I should also apologise for me being the one speaking English. I should be speaking Swedish, obviously, but I don't, so I won't bother. I have been working for 21 years as a researcher. I've been working 17 years at Screen Digest and 8 or 9 years now on digital cinema. So I've followed this from the beginning, almost the beginnings, when DCI, that sort of time when there were 3 or 4 screens in the world. And first 5 years was pretty hard work, because gatherings like this would generally be fairly negative. It would be fairly hostile. No, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. And obviously the past 3 years, that's changed. The whole dynamic has shifted to, okay, it is happening. And since it is happening, why don't we do something about it and do it the best way we can? So, it's very nice to be here. I was here 2 or 3 years ago as well, which, Sweden is never a hostile or negative country. I'll just make that clear now. But there was less digitization at the time, and there was less understanding. I think probably the statistics we saw about Sweden shows that there probably is quite a lot of understanding now about digital cinema. So what am I going to say? Well, I'll try and take you through the market side, the analysis of how we got here, what we're doing now, so what's happening around Europe, around the world. This is a graph I often start with. I'll just stand down here so I can see it. This is basically up until 2012, the growth in digital cinema. Now that includes e-cinema. Digital cinema we tend to think of as the DCI D-cinema, so that's how we measure it. But there are e-cinema networks in the world, in China and India, and if we're going to make an accurate representation of digital, they have to be included. So if we look at that graph there, we can see that up till 2008 or 2009, really there was very little activity. The activity was the pioneer cinema chains, it was test beds, it was some American progress. And 2008, we got 3D with the first 3D films, and you can see very clearly the dark bar. Is it the dark bar? Yes, the dark bar on this one. The dark bar is 3D. So whereas the 2D screens stayed pretty static until 2010, the 3D is what pretty much drove the market. Avatar especially, end of 2009, drove it way up and in fact exceeded 3D. So the only momentum coming from the market was 3D. And you can see quite clearly as well, in the past 18 months, that the 2D is also going upwards. So we reached a point after the financial crisis, it was being driven by a financial reason. 3D is a financial reason. There's a ticket price premium. You can make money out of it. It's fine. That works. But the 2D was on hold. It was pretty much static. What's happened in the past 18 months is that the crisis, that sort of credit crisis has eased, and 2D is now equal to 3D. So around the world, we're in a position where you have. This is at the end of December. We do quarterly data, so quarterly, end of March is next time. Then we had 90,000 D screens in the world, so DCI standard or DCI compliant screens in the world. You can see again that North America was the driver of this, the middle bar, the dark blue bar, that drove the early progress. The US created the standards, the studios did, although there was European input. The US created the business model, the VPF. So the early momentum came from Cinedigm and from a couple of others as well, who were really, sort of pushing, everything was new, and they were pushing this. That was the time that I started looking at this, 2005. So in Europe, very little happened. In Asia, very little happened. The past 18 months again, you can see, first half 12, 2011, first half 11, the European and Asian bars got bigger. So Europe and Asia, very much full swing. Both are well advanced. 75% I think in Europe, across Europe as a whole, 75% across the world, sorry, and 70% across Europe. Asia, likewise, about 70% of the Asian screens are digitized. So very much the majority of screens are digitized. The point at which, actually, out of interest, about 2-3 years ago, I predicted, I was asked to do a prediction about when there would be more digital screens in the world than analog. So I looked at it and I just did a sort of fairly simple, if that's the number of screens we're forecasting, then that's the number of screens per day. So that'll be the day at which. I forecast January the 11th, 2012. So 1 year ago, plus a couple of months. I was 2 weeks out, I'm ashamed to say. I was 2 weeks out, and it haunts me ever since. I have nightmares. But basically the end of 2011, January 2012, was the point at which, after about 100 years, digital screens became the majority cinema medium. So we can very clearly say that the end of 35mm is not now, it's not today. There still are 25,000 screens to be digitized, but it's also not the beginning of 35mm, obviously. We're in the very last phase of that medium. Around the world, it differs, however. There are still parts of the world which are having trouble. And I'll come back down here again because I can't see the graph properly. I like to look at the graph on the screen. So you can see clearly that Asia, 75, North America, 84, Europe, 73.8, even Eastern Europe, 58%. Mostly 3D, but still 58% have been digitized. But you look at Latin America, you look at North Africa, South Africa, parts of the Middle East, although not all of them, a different situation, 40%. Now, what's happened in Europe and Asia and America is essentially the VPF and public money. A combination of VPF and public money, the vast majority of the VPF, has driven digitization. Once everyone understood what it was, once the finances worked, you can digitize, fine. Latin America and North Africa, not South Africa, North Africa, are in a different place. I was in Colombia about 4 months ago, and in Bogota, and there was essentially, they were, or they are now, where we were about 7 years ago. They were at a state where didn't like the whole thing, pretty hostile, thought it was an American plot, all the sort of things we've heard in the past. And they have no VPF. There's no VPF on the table. Well, there is in theory, but there's no one really who is offering it. So they have no public money either. The Colombian government made very clear there is no money from us. So they're in a very different place. They're in a place where they have to find a model that works for them. They have to, if there's a VPF on the table, which there is now, but they have about 6 months to a year to sign, otherwise the VPF ends. There's only a finite time that the VPF deals are on the table. Once they've ended, they've ended. So you've got a lot of screens, 10,000 odd screens in Latin America, of which about 6,000 are still to find a model. Some of those will, because they're circuits, they have a model, the VPF works for most cinemas, but some won't, and there's no public money. If you look at Europe, in this country, so Scandinavia in general, France, Germany, which other countries, Eastern Europe, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, these countries have put public money into digitization. Not the majority necessarily, and in some cases a small minority, but there still has been money which can help convert the smaller screens or screens with more difficult business models, part-time cinemas, things like that. So they don't have that luxury. So whereas I think everyone sort of assumes now we're all done, the whole world's finished, it's not. We're sort of pretty much on the way here, and we're pretty much on the way in other parts of the world, but the whole world is not done. Which is quite good news if you're a manufacturer of technology, I suppose, but it's not good news if you're a cinema owner. If we look now at, I'm trying to break down here, so I'm trying to bring it down a level each time we sort of have a slide. So it starts with the world, and then focuses down to you, to Sweden in the end. But I've ruined the ending now, damn. This is Western Europe. Some things you probably, some fairly obvious things to comment on. The top bar, the top dark blue bar, is 35mm. So they're the 35mm screens, which remaining to do in Europe. So you can see somewhere like France, the UK, we're pretty much done. The UK, probably about 3 months left. 2.5, 3 months, and then the UK is fully digitized. Same with France, about 3 months, 4 months left, fully digitized. Sweden, where you saw earlier on that it's pretty advanced, and by the end of this year you should be fully digitized. Other countries, however, Germany, Italy, and Spain, are sort of the clear ones to look at here, aren't. And I think everyone assumes that Germany is quite well advanced. It lagged a bit. There was political problems, which meant that actually it lagged a year and a half, 2 years behind someone like France or the UK. Germany essentially now is resolved, so the political problems they had are resolved, and that is going up and will carry on going up. So they should be digitized within, say, 18 months or so. But Italy and Spain, they haven't got the same prospect of digitization within that time frame. Public money is very tight. You look at the Spanish cinema audiences, they're declining. Likewise in Italy, actually. Italian cinema audiences are not declining rapidly, but they have a slight downward trend. But they haven't got the same public impetus behind them, or even a driving force behind them. It's not just about money, it's about a driving force. Someone needs to be behind it, driving it. In the UK, we had the DFP, who were driving the independent screens. France had the CNC, which was the driver. So there needs to be someone driving it. And Italy and Spain both lack that, actually. There's no one sort of body or one figurehead who's saying, okay, come on, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, and keep pushing people, because people need to be pushed. So, Spain and Italy, very clearly, are in a different place to the rest of us, actually. And at the moment, I'm not saying they're all going to shut down or anything, but there is a worry about when they will do this. But if we compare just across the board, Western Europe with Eastern Europe, that's what we've got in Eastern Europe. Obviously, the numbers are much lower, and the Russian number means that you can't see any of the other numbers, but you see a lot more 35mm, let's put it that way. And what is being done is 3D. It's very much driven. In the day, where we were in Western Europe 2 years ago, where 3D was the primary driver behind digital, Eastern Europe is still at the point where most markets are 85, 90% 3D. So there is public money, as I mentioned before. There's public money in Czech Republic, in Poland, in Hungary. The public film institutes have put together schemes. There is money that's helping to digitize screens who can't do it, or who can't do it without their help. But you still see that the majority of those markets still have, well, if not a majority, they're half and half digital, half 35mm. That's not a particularly good place to be, logistically, because again, you're in that transition phase where it's necessary to have both systems running at once, but the smaller that time is when you're running two systems, 35mm and digital, the better. It's complicated, it's costly to run two systems. So at the moment, they're in a position where they're trying to find this extra money. The VPFs don't necessarily apply to the smaller screens or some of the more rural screens. Russia, for example, has a whole bunch of new cinemas that were put in the past 5 years, which were invested in, say, in 2005, 2006 with 35mm technology, but now have to reconvert to digital. If you're an accountant and you've amortized your equipment over 15 years, then you don't want to start ripping it out again. So you can clearly see the difference. I mean, across Europe, we're 75% done, but that's weighted Western Europe higher, Eastern Europe lower. And this around the world is the 35mm screens left to convert. So there are around about, I think I said 25, it's about 25,000 screens, I think, but obviously we have new screens coming all the time, especially in places like China. But let's say 25 to 30,000 screens. So you can probably understand by now that those screens actually are going to be quite difficult, because the ones that haven't done it now, to this date now, are generally the ones that will have a problem, or at least are more difficult to do it. So when you're doing the big circuits have all gone, the sort of medium circuits are gone, government schemes are up and running, those ones are doing it, and they're doing it relatively simply now. So the ones that are left to convert are quite difficult. I mean, Mexico's a little bit different. It's dominated by 3 circuits who basically control the market. They're all going, so that's probably not a problem. But Spain, Italy, you can see them in there. Turkey, likewise, there's no real VPF deal on the table in Turkey. Brazil, okay, it's a growing market, and there is now a momentum behind integrators and third parties and VPFs, but that was lacking for the past 3 or 4 years. Germany's in there, Russia's in there. South Africa, well, they've actually gone. But you can sort of start to see as you go down, there are countries that, well, I know looking at this, that, okay, they're fine, but they're not. And down this list, as you go down, you sort of see some of these countries are not necessarily okay. So there is parts of the world which it's not going to be necessarily simple to finish this job off. That's net D screens. So that's each quarter looking at the net installation of screens. You can clearly see that in 2011, 2D became the driver rather than 3D. You can also see, and this we'll come back to this later with HFR, but you can see in quarter 4 there an upward spike, and that's because of The Hobbit. We track 3D as well, so we track titles and we track screens. And in the early days, but still now as well, when you have a big title in 3D, you get a spike, an installation spike of 3D equipment. So actually, titles are still driving installation of equipment. And we'll sort of see a bit later about how that worked with HFR. So actually, last quarter, unusually, 3D and 2D installations were the same. It's not a trend, though, I don't think. And in Sweden as well, you know this now because Ramon told you. Unfortunately, our figures pretty much match, so that's quite good. I always get nervous that my figures won't match the person I'm going to see, but they did. Well, you have the first quarter, which is good. I'll take that figure. I'll take it home and put it in. So that's 2D, 3D in Sweden. So basically you have about 50% of your screens are 3D, 50% 2D. But you can see quite clearly, again, that progress has come in the past year. So the Swedish progress really has been 2012, and then obviously onwards. So your key years will be 2012, 2013. I won't labour that point, as it's been talked about already. 3D, very briefly touch on this. It's not a dying format. It's not, it's not kind of disappear in 2-3 years' time. What's happened? Excuse me, it's quite dry up here. 3D was a novelty. 3D was a novelty. 3D went in. Everyone got very excited. You can make more money. Fine, that makes sense. Still, around the world, about half the world's digital screens are 3D around the world. Somewhere like China, 75% of their screens are 3D. Somewhere like France, I think it's about 50%. The UK is about 40%, 45%, I think. So, each country has got its own attitude towards 3D, and each country's customers, cinema goers, have got their own attitudes towards 3D and what they think about it. But it's still a part of the business. It's now, because it's not a novelty anymore. It's there. The equipment's there. Films are there. It's now a subset of the cinema business. So you have the 2D world, you have the 3D world. And the 3D part of the world, it generally is 2D films which have been converted, has been up to now, broadly anyway. That's not entirely true, but broadly. What's happening, I think, is you're going to see 3D, this subset here, it's going to be, okay, it'll still be 2D films in 3D, but I think it's going to be more of its own sector. It's going to be a 3D sector. You're going to have creativity which is specific to 3D and storytelling which is specific to 3D, which is actually going to shape the momentum of the 3D part of the sector. And 2D, yes, it's still 80%. I mean, broadly, 20-80, 20% 3D, 80% 2D. But I think that now 3D has established itself as a format, and once they sort out issues like brightness and frankly bad conversions, things like that, and once those issues have sort of fed through, then you're going to see, I think, a sort of a different thing going on in 3D. So different techniques and ideas and technologies will come into the 3D world that don't necessarily exist in 2D. Either way, whether that's true or not, you still have the equipment in 50% of the screens, so it still needs to be used. But what about other media? I think this clearly shows that at the moment, 3D is cinema. Now, there have been attempts, and there are channels in 3D. Sky has one in the UK. But there have also been TV channels that have shut down in 3D. So in France, the TV channel there that was 3D, it closed down. There was not enough content, not enough consumers. 3D TVs didn't take off as they hoped. I do sometimes wonder, the technology side of these, there's often a disconnect between the technology, what's going on there and what they expect to happen, and consumption, consumers. Because people buy a TV, it costs them a lot of money. They're not going to replace it in a year just because 3D comes along. So it probably is a longer process than maybe people assumed. But this graph suggests that there's now a point at which other media also contribute to 3D, the 3D revenues. So while cinema is 94% of the 3D revenues for the films that we've looked at, there is still 6% coming from somewhere else. Somewhere else in this case is Blu-ray 3D and VOD, so on-demand 3D. They're just very, very small. It relies on TVs, TV sets, it relies on technology. Probably, in the long term, relies on some form of glasses-free technology. But at this point in time, that doesn't exist. And cinema really is where 3D is at. So it's a good thing and a bad thing. You know? If 3D was wider, then you'd probably have more films, more money, more investment, different things happening because there'd be more potential revenue. At the moment, 3D is only be seen in the cinema, which is actually, for cinema, is a really good thing because it still differentiates 3D from the home. And ultimately, in a digital environment, and the digital landscape that we're in, cinema is now in, differentiation is going to be is more and more important. Cinema has a key point of differentiation is that they're not the home, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. It's an opportunity, it's a good thing, but they'll probably need more. So, I've alluded to this, technology. Now, I'm not a technologist, it's written there in bold, so you can't accuse me afterwards of saying, oh, well, you thought you knew about technology. I don't. I'm not a technologist. I understand technologies and how they apply to a market and how they can evolve and how they shape things. So don't ask me about bits and bytes, okay? That's not my thing. But Ramon asked me to mention technology in the context of what I do, market analysis. So I've chosen 3. Now, 2 are consumer-facing, high frame rates, 3D and immersive sound. They're things that the consumer will notice. They're things that actually will change the cinema-going experience. The other one is laser illumination, so using lasers as a light source for projectors. Did I mention I'm not a technologist, okay? Just so you know. So HFR, from a non-technology point of view. Okay, we know what it is, it's high frame rates, okay? But it doesn't really matter what it is. And what it matters is how it's going to impact on cinemas. And do we need it? And that's the first point, is there is a big split in the business about whether we need HFR. Yes, no. There's only 2 high-profile directors who are actually pushing this, but they are pretty high-profile. It's James Cameron and Peter Jackson. So you can't really say no to them. They didn't say no to them. No one said no to them. That's good. I think we need people to test the new things. And doing some small film in HFR will change nothing. Doing The Hobbit in HFR could change things. So there are Hobbits. There are another 2 to come, I think. It's a trilogy, yes. So is it changing things? Well, we estimate that about 1,200 screens worldwide upgraded. So you don't need to upgrade just for HFR. You need to upgrade for HFR 3D. So about, of the 90,000 screens digitized in the world, about 1,200, about approximately half in the States or North America and half elsewhere, upgraded between $3,000 and $8,000 per screen, invested that money to upgrade to HFR 3D. So that's, again, it's a spike. It's what I referred to with 3D. A title, a content, a film drove technology spike. It happened with 3D. It's happening, what happened there with HFR. I think the key now is, and I don't know the answer to this, but is there going to be another spike the next time The Hobbit comes out at the end of this year? Because, as you can see, there's only those films in HFR. That's the only ones I can find. I might be wrong, but the only ones I can find are those. And if you're asking someone to upgrade between $3,000 and $8,000 per screen, okay, you do it once, fine, it's done once. But is there a reason to do that? 3D had the ticket price premium. Well, HFR doesn't. Only Kinepolis, I think, in Belgium, maybe not only, but again, Kinepolis in Belgium put a premium on HFR. No one else that I saw did. So if you're not putting a premium on HFR, then how do you recoup that investment? Is it because more people go and see it? That's possible. Maybe more people will go and see it. They'll come to your cinema rather than someone else's. So that's a reason to do that. But again, there's only 1 title a year, maybe 2 in 2014. So for 1 title a year, will you do that? It remains to be seen. But it's there, and I think that as we move forward and as replacement cycles of machines, they're going to be more advanced the next time we replace them. In 5, 6, 7, I don't know, 20 years down, whatever. They'll be more advanced. There'll be 4K workflows. All these sort of things mean it's easier to make HFR films. It's still quite costly at the moment. The Hobbit used 48 red cameras to film The Hobbit. So 48 cameras all shooting, and it used data processors. It used a data center in New Zealand, Peter Jackson's own data center, called Vega Digital. And they're processing something like 40,000 processors of 24 hours a day, just rendering frames of film. And this lasted for 2.5 months. And this is essentially an IT operation. It was a film as well. It's a very good film, I'm sure. Haven't seen it, but it was essentially an IT operation, logistically. How do we get this film into a screen? So you imagine, HFR, okay, it doubles the information in a film. So your average film is, what, 250 gigabytes, so HFR is 500, then HFR 3D is more than that, and HFR 3D 4K is more than that, and you carry on going. We used to assume, I think, when satellite was talked about as distribution mechanism, and still it is a distribution mechanism, but when it was originally sort of assumed that satellite may be the way to go, it was thought that film sizes would come down in size. Not the opposite is actually happening. Film sizes are going up in size. So that's high frame rates from my point of view. It's there. It's an option. It's a theme I keep returning to. It's options. Technology gives you options. It doesn't mean you have to choose them, though. It's really not about technology. None of this is about technology. It's about what do you do with it and how do you apply it. So some people believe in it. Some people think it's the way to go. Some people don't. So on that one, I'll just say I'll sit on the fence, I think. The other one, if I'll do 3D sound first, because this is also the consumer-facing, the one that the customer notices. The cinema girl will notice a 3D sound system, an immersive sound system. I think this is quite a more, sort of slightly easier to describe and slightly easier to sell, really. Not that I'm selling it. But digital image improvements, I'll rephrase that. It's easier to understand why it came about. Okay, that's how I'll put it. Digital image improvements. Obviously, the digital cinema, 2K, 4K, good image now, good projection. Really sort of drove the sound guys to say, look, we haven't done much in this space for about 20 years, so we better sort of up our game a bit here, because we've got a great image on the screen now, and it's a fairly old sound system accompanying it. And especially when you have 3D, 3D is all about immersiveness. And 3D, if you have an immersive 3D film going on with a fairly basic sound system, it jars, it doesn't feel right. And so about a year ago, 5 different manufacturers launched or relaunched new sound systems. Some call it 3D sound, don't really know why. Some call it immersive sound. Essentially what's going on is there's a new way to look at sound. So you have broadly 2 systems going on the market. You've got object-based and channel-based. Channel-based is what we know. It's Dolby 5.1, it's Dolby 7.1. Bear in mind, I'm not a technologist, okay? But this is what I understand. Now, one of the systems, Oro, is a channel-based system, 11.1, so effectively it's got 11 speakers. Well, the other one, Dolby, came up with a system, along with another company that they bought, called ImSound, but they came up with a different way of looking at it, which is object-based sound. So object-based sound is effectively each sound in the film is an object, and that sound can be moved around where you want it to do. And because of the speaker positioning in the auditorium, it's not channel-based. So you have a sound that might be me talking, unfortunately for everyone. That sound, if someone has an iPad and has me, the object, I'm the object, goes like this and enlarges it, I become louder, or preferably shuts me up, I become smaller. They could make me whiz across the auditorium because I'm an object now. So I'm not assigned a speaker. I'm assigned a space. That's how they describe it anyway. Both systems are very good. I've heard them both, and they both materially improve sound systems that we have now. And they're expensive. I mean, let's be honest. A good sound system is expensive. It's $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, and that's per screen. So it's not going to be an option for every screen. You're not going to look at every screen and say, oh yeah, we must stick Oro in every screen or Atmos on every screen. Yeah, it's more of a selection. Which screens should we put it in? Our premiere screens, we'll put it in there. How does this fit into our overall sort of premium mix, if you like? What we're offering the customer, how do we fit these sound systems into that? So if you have a 3D screen, you might put the 3D sound in that screen. But it also comes back a bit to that because of the content creation, the sound mixers. Sound mixers, until I started looking at this, which was only a year ago, I didn't really have much to do with sound because it hadn't really changed for a long time. But sound mixers are important. How you mix a film has to be mixed for a certain technology. So, Dolby or Oro, you have to mix that film in the technology to get the best out of it. So you have Dolby and Oro both trying to push their equipment, but also the mixing. Will you mix our film in our format? So they both have films that they've signed up. Dolby has 30 films that have been mixed now in Atmos. Oro has a deal with DreamWorks Animation for 15 films. So they have content people on their side. They have to be able to fit backwards as well. So if you have Dolby 5.1 in your cinema now, or 7.1, has to be able to work with that as well. But I think the main point for me here is, again, the choice part. So cinema exhibitors have a choice of something new they can put in somewhere, so something new they can offer the customer. But they're expensive, so it is not going to be for everyone, for every screen. But it is very much everything's moving towards, again, digital media landscape. It's moving towards, okay, what can we offer the customer that really makes our environment the best place to see a film? And technology can work in all sorts of ways, and it works at box office level, concession level, it works in all sorts of ways. And we now have, in the cinema environment, technology can really add to what you're offering the customer. That's how I sort of see it. Going backwards, this is the other part of technology I thought I'd talk about, which is not really for the customer. It is ultimately for the customer, because it's about brightness. And brightness is something that, especially in 3D, is lacking. Yeah, we know that, well, I know because I go to EDCF meetings and all my colleagues tell me this sort of stuff, that 14-foot Lamberts is the brightness that should be on a screen. Some 3D in the USA is shown at 4 or 5-foot Lamberts. It doesn't really matter what that measure means, but you can see that it's a third of what it should be. That's the main point. So laser illumination is bright. It's bright and it's cost-effective because it ends up cost-effective, I'm told. It's because it lasts a long time. Your average lamp, you all know because you're cinema owners, it lasts, what does it last, 1,000 hours, something like that? But the average laser lamp, we're told, it doesn't actually really exist yet, but it lasts 30,000 hours. So that's 30,000 lamps. So already you've saved 30,000 lamps, if that is actually how it works. It also says they claim it's efficient on power and efficient on heat. So all those things add to the cost of operations. But how does this work? Because at the moment we're not anywhere near, as far as I understand, anywhere near a viable product. If you had $150,000, you wanted to buy a laser light source, you might be able to get one for your projector, but we don't. So the ambition must be to bring it right down to a level that is affordable, which I think is 3 to 5 years away. So 3 to 5 years means that we're looking at the replacement cycle. So some of the exhibitors around Europe and the world digitized in 2007, 2006, 2007. So they will be looking relatively soon. In my replacement cycle, in my forecasts, it starts in 2017 of equipment, that is. Now that's based on all sorts of assumptions that I could be challenged on and have been. But I have to assume something, so I'm assuming that the warranty of the projector, which is 10 years, extended warranty, is a lifetime. So if you assume that, we start in 2017. So for the next round of equipment, then laser illumination becomes a possibility. It becomes something we can do. By then, hopefully, there will be a viable product. Until recently, I read about Red, in fact. Red, the camera manufacturer, are claiming that they have a cinema projector, which is laser illuminated, 4K, which is going to be significantly cheaper than what they have now. But it doesn't exist yet. So at the moment, I'm not really going to talk much more about that. Just to say that the 4 projector manufacturers we have in the moment in cinema, digital cinema rather, might be accompanied or might be joined by another one. But there are significant things to overcome. There's a Laser Illumination Projector Association, LIPA, which has just been formed in the States and worldwide. And even they say, they're obviously pushing this technology, and they say there's significant things to be overcome first, such as regulation, such as the perception, lasers, it's like transformers, lasers flying around everywhere. People think that might be dangerous. Speckle on the screen, costs, all these things are, by their own admission, quite a way away from being resolved. So laser illumination, seems to me it's an extremely interesting way to illuminate a screen, or a projector rather, for the screen, because it's bright, it's going to be efficient, it'll last a long time, but I don't think we're there yet. So it's something that I think we need to keep an eye on, and I'll probably be back here in 3 years' time saying the same thing, in fact, but it's there. The last area I want to focus on is what Ramon touched on as well, in Swedish, but even I understood the slide, which said electronic distribution. This is getting stuff around. Phase 1 of cinema, digital cinema, was about doing the screens, projectors. Let's get the image done. Let's get the screens digitized. We're sort of, in many people's world now that's done. It's sort of history. We're moving on. Phase 2 was always about electronic distribution. It was about getting stuff around more efficiently and not having to use replication and couriers. You're going to hear later on from Unique, who are one of the sort of pioneers in this sector. They're doing things in Norway and other countries on this very subject. So they can tell you a lot more about what they're doing and probably a lot more about the technology side. But I just wanted to sort of focus on the three things you can do to get films around, and sort of look at each one a little bit and then give you some European data that we've developed as well. When I was in Asia recently, I did a panel discussion in CineAsia in Hong Kong, and what came out of that very clearly, I had a deluxe on there, I had a studio, I had 2 exhibitors, and what came out very clearly from that is that somewhere like Asia, highly fragmented, different languages, lots of sea going on, there's lots of sea and islands around the place. So it's actually quite difficult to think of electronic networks to put in place to get those distribution electronically. They weren't the solutions that have been proposed. There are people in Asia who are doing it. Thaicom, the Thai telecoms operator, has launched a digital cinema distribution venture, but they're doing it in the countries that are relatively around Thailand. So you have these 2 ways of doing it, so fiber and satellite. Fiber, I include internet, fiber as well. Fiber, satellite. You still have hard drives. And what came out of Asia very clearly is that actually hard drives, they're being entrenched in the system to a certain extent. It doesn't apply in Norway, it doesn't apply in the United States either, actually, because the deluxe EchoStar system in the United States is fairly, it's moving on pretty quickly. They have all the studios signed up, they have the major exhibitors signed up, it's a satellite system, they have a single language, they have a single film culture, they have 7,500 sites. You need 1,000 sites, or 500 to 1,000 sites to make a satellite network viable. So America, USA, North America rather, has all those you can do to put a satellite system in. And some parts of Europe do as well. But quite a lot of the world, you don't have that. And fiber internet relies on having fiber powerful enough to get films down the line. So it doesn't take 3.5 days to get one film. So what's happening certainly with the big labs, Deluxe and Technicolor, they're focusing, maybe not Technicolor, but Deluxe anyway, are focusing on making the hard drive system more efficient and therefore cheaper. Because for studios anyway, it's all about price points. It's all about what is the price per unit we can get this down to. We know what 35mm was, we know what 35mm cost to replicate, we know what 35mm cost to deliver by a courier, and then return and destroy, all that sort of stuff. There was a life cycle to it, and we knew the costs. In this digital world, we didn't really know the costs, they're all a bit vague, but they are starting to harden up now, they're starting to become quite clear. Now, the price point I was told in the Asian panel was $100, so the studios and the labs are working on getting $100 per unit for a replication of a hard drive and delivery to somewhere. That's pretty good, given that it used to be about $1,500, $1,000 for a 35mm. So $100 per unit, and then there was someone else who said, yes, but we're aiming for more than that, we're aiming for $50 per unit. Good, so they're doing things more effectively. They're building replication sites in all the countries around Asia, so they don't have import costs, import taxes, or transport costs, and they can bring the price down to get that hard drive to a cinema. What this does, though, is because of this sort of perpetual cost reduction, you're entrenching hard drives. So if you're going to go to a studio and say, well, actually we've got a solution that's satellite-based, how much does it cost? Well, it's going to cost $150 per unit. Well, no, we don't want it, because we've got it down to 50. That's essentially what's happening. It's not happening everywhere, but I can see it, and I certainly see it happening somewhere. So you're getting to a point, really, that I think hard drives might be around for longer than we think, actually. Because fiber works. We know fiber works because the Norwegians are doing it. The Dutch are doing it. The Koreans are looking at it. Fiber, it works. If there's a good fiber infrastructure in place. That doesn't exist everywhere, though. So good fiber infrastructure. Is it a dedicated one? Do you borrow someone else's? If you build your own, it's expensive. Most countries aren't big enough to start building your own broadband infrastructure. So you have to piggyback on existing infrastructure. Is there bandwidth available? So there are issues there that need to be resolved before you can start offering that as a service. Satellite, we come back to the issues of versioning and fragmentation of territories. So you have where there's a big block of sites, fine, satellite works fine. Where there isn't, it may not. So you do have, I think, a situation where every territory, which is always the case, and I always say this actually, every territory will do its own thing, because we all have our own film cultures. We've all developed our own ways of doing things around the world. Whether it's production financing, whether it's distribution, whether it's the terms between exhibitor and distributor, every country has its own way of doing it. There's very few multi-territory sort of practices. Everyone has their own way. And that will be the same, I think, in distribution, which is going to mean it's fine for one country. You may have competition, you may not. There might be one provider, there might be 2 or 3. But if you're behind that as a distributor and you're trying to do multi-territory distribution, then it's going to be quite complicated. Because what I'm trying to work on at the moment is to build a map, a global map. I have these visions like this. I like stuff like this. And I want to do a map on a screen. I'll show you next time I'm here. And it'll be the world. It'll be each country in the world. And it'll give you the infrastructure for distribution in that country. And I bet you it's pretty complicated. And behind that, there's going to be some IT guy ripping his hair out, going, oh, God, I wish I had one system. but there won't be, quite honestly. I don't think so anyway. Sorry, I've gone off the point there slightly. But, so that's the data. The data I was going to show you. Yeah, this is the last slide. Electronic distribution. So this is data we've developed. We do this now. We track this. I spent quite a long time trying to get this data together. We can track this quarterly now. And around Europe, you can see, again, I think it's pretty obvious, France, extremely advanced. So there's over 1,400 sites. This is for DCP delivery only, okay, not alternative content. I look at that separately. That's a separate area, really, for me. It's different systems. Well, it can be the same system, but it's a different, for me, it's different. So this is DCP delivery, and it's either fiber or satellite. So France, yeah, SmartJog, DSAT, what did you mention? Archiva. Those companies, especially SmartJog in France, have made it that France is an extremely connected place. There's lots of sites, because there's lots of single-screen cinemas. There's 2,500 cinema sites. So it works. Single language, single block of territory. It works. UK, well, it's upping. And within 6 months, it's sort of doubled as well. So the UK, you're starting to see how the Archiva satellite system is installing, it's getting into place. But other places around Europe, very much less than that. So while across Europe, I think 25% of sites are now DCP delivery enabled, if that makes sense. Half of those are in France. So if you take out France, you've got 12.5% of sites are enabled. So you have a beginnings of a system, but it is very much the beginnings of a system. We're in the early days yet of logistical delivery, NOCs and KDMs, and all that sort of stuff. All the stuff that goes around electronic distribution is in its early days, infancy. But we were here with projection as well a while ago. So we're also here with this. Just briefly, you won't see all that. It's not mentioned. But those are the announced D-cinema delivery schemes in the world at the moment. Okay, so that's what's been announced. There's other stuff being worked on behind the scenes, but there's quite a few. So there's quite a few people who have put their hat in the ring and said, yeah, we want to do this. So you can definitely see it's a growing part of our market now. It's a growing thing that we're looking at. The last slide is the timeline for 35mm. So until recently, I was asked to speak quite a lot on the end of 35mm. I looked at this in some detail about 2 years ago, and I put a timeline on it. And I thought I'd end with this, which is when I see 35mm ending, which effectively is in 2.5 years' time. It's the end of 2015 around the world. I think 35mm as a mainstream cinema format will be effectively dead. So the 2.5 years is really the places in the world that I mentioned before. It's Latin America, it's North Africa. Those will be the ending, the end ones. In the UK, it'll be turned off pretty soon. Sweden, I think it's been turned off already, 35mm replication anyway. As we move towards 100% digitization, you can see very clearly that there's no longer any need for 35mm. So that's essentially what I wanted to say. Cinema is now, we have this technology everywhere. We have digital everywhere. We're part of a digital media landscape. We really are part of that world now. And we can start using this technology. It's not about technology. Never believe that. It's about what you do with it. It's about what you can do to make the customer have a better experience. That's how I see it anyway. And I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Thanks a lot.